G'day, folks, wherever you're joining us from. This is the Wednesday webcast with Mike, except it's happening on Tuesday. We're moving chairs on the Titanic around at the moment. As Western Australia is reasonably COVID-free and we're kind of more unlocked than most of the rest of the known world, business is starting to move for me and also the people I interview. And so that means we're going to have to shuffle around a bit to fit in with good people when we can. So welcome, wherever you're listening to us from. I hope that your world is feeling filled with possibility and hope. I know that it still remains an interesting and dark time for many places in the world. And that's part of what we'll be talking about today with my guest, Suzanne Waldron. Susan's a fabulous person. I've had the great pleasure of facilitating with her side by side on some occasions and being a participant in rooms where she has facilitated. I've read quite a bit of stuff that she's written, and I have admired from afar her curation of TEDx in Perth and other interesting things globally. Suzanne, you've just recently written the next of your books, and I say that because you're definitely not a beginner to this game, and I doubt this will be your last. Tell us a little bit about Sleeping Giants.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Mike. Mutual fan of yours, by the way, just going to have to say, right back at you. And hello, everybody. I hope you're all having a fabulous day wherever you are, whatever day it is you're watching. Sleeping Giants was trying to come out of me literally for 2 years, I reckon. I even went to Flinders Island to try and write a book, my next book, this book. A couple of years ago, I had 8 days in a writer's retreat, and I literally, there's only 800 people that live on the island. I think I met every single one of them. And write a thing. And the thing that I wrote was on the plane on the way back about not writing. So it's taken a really long time for this to come through my system. And finally it did at the earlier part of this year when I found myself in a slum in an orphanage in Africa. And Nakuru Hope is a place that will forever be in my system. And it allowed me to really unpack and uncover a lot of what I wanted to say more about these sleeping giants that we have inside of us. So there's a lot I can tell, I can unpack as we go along, but it was actually a real relief to actually get it written. So it's 2 years in the making, maybe 41 years in the making, and 12 weeks to write and produce. Yeah.
Amazing. So that I always find that part interesting. I'm working on my second book myself, and you talk to people who are writers and how rapidly the process happens sometimes. But as you say, after a period of enormous gestation, often, it's fascinating, isn't it? You can feel the glimmers of what you know are pretty profound ideas that need to be out there beyond yourself. And there's really quite an amazing journey to bringing that stuff into reality through yourself.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most challenging part of that?
Definitely the what am I going to say and why should it be worth saying?
Yeah.
So because there's I want to say loads of things, but how am I going to choose this thing that I want to say that's the most poignant and the most developed that I've got? And why would anybody bother reading it, and what would it do when they read it, if they read it? And I think that's why it takes a couple of years before you get to the front page of the manuscript and you go, I want to write a book that's like this. So I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
The longest part for me, but the hardest part, because it's narrowing and being clear enough to understand what it is you want to say in the first place.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what work is. What about you? What do you think?
Look, I would agree. I think that when I wrote my first book, Thrive and Adapt, I started writing 5 times. And each time I was absolutely sure that I had the book, and I had quite a clear picture of how I was going to do it. And I'd get partway in and I'd go, this is an essay at best, it's not actually a book. And there's something about the structure and what I had in mind and the purpose of it kind of fell over once it tried to get bigger. And it wasn't until I tested some stuff with audiences and tested some stuff with myself, and really it was almost like by the time I came to write it, it was deeply in my bones, and the writing was very easy.
Yeah, same. Yes.
But the work in that decade before was
exactly right.
quite intense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly how I would frame that for sure.
Yeah. So Sleeping Giants, in many ways, it's calling people to that kind of journey.
Yes.
To find within them the best of themselves and to live up to that.
Yeah. God, that was a good summary. For sure, it's a calling to life. It's a philosophy that is about deep thought and provocation, and it's an invitation really to see yourself in the way that is necessary for you to be in your most boldest, most liberated place in your life that you can possibly attain at any given time as you change through life.
Yeah, that's lovely. For me, what I really love about it, it's a nice tight. Look at it. It's a gorgeous book. It looks fantastic because of the art in it, and it is kind of paradoxical. It's a delightfully easy read, because it reads like rich poetry. It just kind of rolls off your mind and your tongue if you're reading it aloud, or just quietly in your mind. But paradoxically, it packs a punch. So it kind of sneaks up on you a little. You go, oh, isn't this lovely? And then you go, oh, aha moment.
You basically just entered into what my mind is like.
So for me, I've read a lot, and I've done a lot of very intentional work of putting myself in places of essentially doing what you're calling us to through Sleeping Giants, which is, live the best and boldest life you can live for the greatest effect for the world. I love that. I love the line at the end of your introduction to it that says, your giant awaits you and the world awaits your giant. There were a few, so some pieces of this, it's like it felt like a familiar friend, just beautifully articulated. And there were other pieces where it's like, oh, that's actually really stopped me and given me a significant piece of insight. I think the most profound of those was your piece on regret. And I love the way that they're just one pages, so it's so much richness condensed into such a small and economical use of words. You say in the piece on regret something along the lines of, it's because you know something that you didn't know before. And that was such a liberating thing for me. It's like, oh, of course, that's so obvious now that you say it out loud. And I found myself, I actually read it on a recent holiday, and we had a number of experiences while we were away, including the chaotic prep leading up to, it was probably, as many people have in 2020, the most changed set of plans I think I've ever had. And recognizing that that's against a backdrop of privilege and relative ease to how some people have been disrupted by this thing. So there were a number of times where regret would have been easy, and it's like, oh, I'm feeling that, but that's just because I know something now that I didn't know before. And it was an instant reframe for that emotion in the moment, which I think is really powerful. So thank you for that. That's a gift for me personally.
My pleasure.
Which bits I would imagine you journey through this in various ways, where different bits will stand out to you for different reasons, and they come from a deep well, clearly. Are there any pieces of the book that particularly stand out that you'd like to share or speak to today?
Perhaps I'd like to tell the story of how it was born in Africa.
That'd be great.
Because there's lots of, yeah, I'll just start talking and see what comes out. But I remember being in this orphanage with Christopher Mahoka, who was the director of the school of the orphanage in Kenya, and we were sitting talking under a tree, as we were often, and he said to me, there's this concept in his world about people who are sleeping giants. And that, you know, because I was talking to him about walking through life with our eyes closed, and, you know, the deep poverty, and then the paradoxical nature of privilege in other places, in other areas, even within their own country. And he just, you know, we talked a lot about hope, and we talked a lot about, you know, what it really means to need to survive, both emotionally and physically. And he told me the story about sleeping giants. And I remember in that moment, I was just looking at him, but I didn't, you know, I was just like, oh my God, that's the title of my book. That's the title of my book. That's the title of my book. And I said to him, would it be okay if I use this title? And he's like, absolutely. And in those experiences of witnessing extreme poverty and abuse and abandonment and government abandonment, where people are literally, millions of people are forgotten and live in squalor without water or food, it taught me and showed me hope in a way that I've never understood it before. So through the process of understanding consistent hope and faith from the people that were around who are in dire circumstances, and the real ability of a village and sharing and connecting with one another, allowed me to sort of tap into all of the elements of what it takes to go from a place where we have forgotten who we are, or we have been forgotten, to move through to this place of liberating and waking ourselves through that liberation, regardless of the circumstance of which we find ourselves in. You know, as humans, no matter what, this is what I saw, the commonality between the poverty and the privilege was that we have an element of ability to actually support each other, and the commonality of our own hope and our own ability to liberate ourselves within the relevance of which we stand and sit. That doesn't mean it's equal.
No.
It does mean that there's a place where we can allow ourselves to feel our way through relationships, connection to ourselves, and maybe even a higher faith, because that was a very big element of that in Africa for them. And so when I thought through the structure of the book, I went back to my research in my master's degree, which was, why do some humans think about what to do that in a big sense beyond themselves and do it, versus people who think about doing something a massive beyond themselves and not doing it. So my whole research was around pro-social leadership. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, there's finally a use for my research. And so basically, it's in me, but sometimes I forget that I've done it. And it's just this weird thing, like, I don't know, it was so hard. Like, I cried more probably doing my master's degree. Like, people say to me, what's your master's degree? And I say perseverance. Like, it's just so hard. I don't ever want to do one again. But there's 4 stages to this, moving through like significant pro-social action. And so I translated that into more poetry than academia, and started to then write from a behavioural perspective, but also a deep soul perspective on what those stages are. And so there's the originating stage, which is we're born with a lot of things that we already need and have inside of ourselves. But then we go through the forgetting stage, where we lump all the stuff on us, you know, social norms and conditioning and expectations, and we've got to change who you are to fit in. And then we go through the waking stage, where, you know, you think, oh my goodness, like, I can actually get rid of some of this crap that's in me, on me, and that I've got this armor or this filter, and I can be more, you know, directive on who I am and what I believe in, and be a certain way. And I start to release all the shackles. And then there's the liberation of that, and how that means you move through the world, and what you're really called to deeply do, no matter whether that's big or small, doesn't matter. The size of the giant does not matter. It's the fact that we have them inside of us. And in this premise, there's one, but I reckon there's hundreds. And there's, you know, this opportunity for us to unleash it and have this, you know, deep connection to something bigger than ourselves that really serves beyond us, but it also deeply serves the worthiness of our life. So that's how, for me, I was like, how do I write this? And I wrote that in an actual order of stages, but it doesn't have to be read that way. But yeah, there is some process behind it.
Yeah, lovely. The Just to take you back a little bit into what you said there, there's the piece about becoming aware of shackles that hold us, and then doing something about it, and it's fascinating territory, that, I reckon. It's some of the most challenging work I think people can undertake is that, looking deeply into yourself and seeing parts of yourself that you want to change, both in terms of mindset and behavior. And at one level, it's as simple as that, isn't it? It's like, oh, there it is. Let me change that.
It's so not.
and at another level, it's possibly the hardest and most complex thing that you can ever do. What's your take on that in terms of somebody wanting to genuinely tackle themselves and move through whatever it is that they want to or need to move through? What's your take on the most effective way to do that? Different people address that from many different angles. What's your take on it?
Completely different for everyone, but I think there's some underpinning notions, and like Michael Singer, who I love and wish he was my granddad. He probably is. I'll claim him anyway.
Yeah.
But he says, trade expectations for appreciation. And I really love that, because there's a sense of being able to allow ourselves to come back off of how it's supposed to be done. Because everybody's journey is different and experiences are different. This is why it really gets on my goat when people say it takes so many days to break a habit. No, it doesn't. It takes as long as it takes. It's different for different reasons, for different people and different depths. Please don't, package that into something that's not real.
Yes.
And it's
just to dive into that example in itself, my experience of that personally is there's habits that I've broken instantly with it. Like, let me get rid of that.
Yeah.
Never gone back. And there's other ones where I've worked on it for a lot of years and it's still persistent.
Exactly right. So there's so many different reasons why those neural pathways are attached in us. And so, and they can be instant and they can take lifetimes. So that's why it's a bit, it's a bit crap to say those sort of things. But I think expectations hold us back. Because you're projecting and speculating into something you can't actually know.
Yes.
And so there's a gentleness around. That's why probably we're in the thing I thought about when you're talking about regret as well, is there's a permission to just to be as you are now and accept where you're at. Because I actually believe that everyone did the best they could in the time that they had at the time. With the best surroundings, the best environment, the best resources, the best communication, the best knowledge. And even if someone goes, well, yeah, but I could have known better. I'm like, genuinely, if you really could have, you would have. There's something in there that stopped you.
Yes.
And so even though you knew, there was something that made you not do it because there was another area of which didn't really hold you in that moment. And so there's always a place for us to go, okay, now I know differently, I will do better, I'll do differently. And even if someone makes repeat mistakes, in that there's something you're missing. To not be able to actually, get into a place of acceptance. So I think acceptance and expectations are probably key to some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We dive into that fairly deeply in the world of survival as well. The couple of pieces around expectations were that, well, in my view, they're actually the thing that kills people in a survival situation. It's that there's a sort of mismatch between what they expect and what's actually happening. And the mismatch means that they act based more on what they expect than what's actually going on. A simple way to explain that is, if we're whizzing along in our four-wheel drive to the middle of the desert somewhere, it's all air conditioned, and our favourite Spotify tracks on the quadraphonic sound system, and something breaks and we end up by the roadside. We've got this expectation of a destination, of a time frame for that, and so we rush to try and meet that expectation that's already there, even though it's completely artificial. It's something that only exists in our head. And people often act hastily. They do things like walk away from vehicles well equipped with water, and frantic attempt to try and meet the expectation and manage to not make that adjustment. So it's a fascinating piece of territory. I think there's a paradoxical piece in there somewhere, because they're simultaneously a human superpower and a massive Achilles heel. The superpower, I think, is that there's almost nothing, if anything at all, that exists around us of our own creation that doesn't result, it's not the direct result of somebody's unrealistic expectation somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, oh, stuff it, we'll make an engine, we'll make light, we'll make books, you know, we pull all kinds of things literally out of our head based on expectation. But if we hang on to them too tightly, they can really work us over.
Yeah. I kind of come up with a thought in my mind ages ago about directional intention. So I was like, set the direction and the intention and then let it go. Like, go down the road, look for it, open your filters, open your system to be absorbing and wanting and looking and searching, like, subconsciously for these things. If it's deeply congruent, it will come your way through, you know, all the different opportunities that present themselves. But it's directional intention.
Yes.
Not absolute expectation, you know?
Yep. Yeah, I like that. So let's talk a little bit more about Africa. One of the comments that has been a little bit of an echo in this series of conversations that we had since COVID first started making itself really felt in Western Australia, the kind of wave, if you like, has gone through initial what's going to happen, almost survival mode thinking, and then into a sort of longer burn, how do we keep ourselves mentally well, pointing in the right direction, all that kind of territory. And now here, at least, a little bit more into more recovery focused mode. And part of the echo in there is an awareness that from where we speak, you know, we're in Perth, Western Australia. It's a most isolated capital city in the world, and right now that's really a great place to be. And it means that we've got a uniquely coloured view of the world and what's happening in it. There was some early comments, I don't know who made them, but popped up a bit in media around, with COVID, everybody's in the same boat. And somebody made the observation that, you know, we're in the same storm, but we're in really different boats.
Jason Clark. Yeah.
What a great observation, I thought. And Africa v here is a really poignant case in point, I guess. So tell us a little bit about what took you to Africa. How long were you there? What did you find?
What did I find? Jeez. Well,
just the small questions.
Yeah, no. I'm like, look at me. I just went back. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can say all the things. I went because I had a really tough childhood, and I have been through a lot of difficult scenarios at a very early age, things that shouldn't really happen to a child. And then come through life, and I'm in a really good place, mostly. And I've gotten to this point where I just realised that I might have lost touch with some realities in the world. And I wanted to go to a place that felt like it would be the stark opposite to my life as it stands now. Because I actually believe we live in the most affluent place in the world. Maybe other than Monaco, probably. And for the everyday people, we live in the most affluent place in the world. And so I wanted to go and see what was common, actually. Like, it was a really, like, even thinking about it now, like, it sounds like a really intellectual desire. Like, I want to go and see what's common between people who are really poor and people who are really rich. And it just feels weird saying it now, because, like, I literally got more than I bargained for in a way that I can never actually understand, probably deeply. And so it sounds a little bit wanky that that's what I was trying to do, but it came from a really good intention of wanting to really understand another place in another time in another life that I couldn't possibly understand I could theorize it, but I couldn't, you know, until I went. And then when I arrived, I don't know if anyone's been who's listening, and they might understand different countries, different places, but it was shocking. I'll tell you a story that sits with me, probably one of the most. The thing about being there for a few weeks, and I was only there for a few weeks, I had to come home early unexpectedly due to medical issues. So that was a shock and a surprise for me as well. So I had to come home. I had an instinct that there was a problem for me in my body, and I had to come home to try and work that out. So it was cut a bit short. So I was just there for just under a month. But I was standing in front of this lady who had 15 mouths to feed, and she lived in a room probably the size of our bedroom, one of our bedrooms. There were 15 people. And as I was standing with her, there was a pot of water in the middle of the room and some planks of wood. That was it. The only other thing that she had was a mattress that had been shard off. So there was these like bits of foam that had been urinated on, bled on, laid on. And those were these tiny little seats that they had that they would sleep on at night in the same room. You can imagine it's a mud room, and so it was the condensation side of it created a lot of atmosphere for bugs. So lots of mosquitoes, and there were chickens also running around, and basically 15 people lived like that. The only thing they had was a pot of water that had come from the river, which was poison. And when I put in my problem-solving brain on, I'm just like, so why doesn't she get some seeds, for example, to plant? Well, if she had seeds to plant, then she wouldn't water them. She would probably drink the water for the children. And if they had land, then they would have seed. They would be able to put seeds in. But there's no seeds. There's no land. There's no water. There's millions of people in this situation, exactly the same situation, looking for the same sort of contra deals or work or anything that they can get their hands on. And there's no toilets or healthcare or police, or literally for the first time in my entire life, I was like, I cannot see how you work this out. Like, I cannot see how you work this out. And every single day, other than sharing with one another, every single day, those examples just got worse. I was in the worst of the worst situations, and I absolutely, for the first time in my life, could not, in my privilege, problem solve a way out of it. And these are humans that I'm standing with, holding, and I think she has to sell a child to get money for the rest of them. She has to sell herself sexually to be able to deal with that, or sell her children to that trade to be able to get money. And then people are like, so why? People say to me, why don't they get contraception, or why don't they stop reproducing? Or there's all these questions that people are coming up with to ask, or problem solve. And then, there's cultural barriers as well of how people act in their faith or in the way that they believe men and women should procreate together or not procreate together. Women who don't necessarily can't procreate or could be killed because they're not useful. And so there's a lot of ways and angles that I sort of thought, how is the system breaking down here so that people are abandoned and forgotten, literally to the point of that section of the country just doesn't exist as far as a government is concerned. And so what I found, to answer your question, was a love for our government and what profound hope really means. When you absolutely have got nothing other than relationships and hope. Nothing. And I had never really understood what hope was until then.
Yeah, that's massive. So you went with you were there with Nakuru Hope, is that right?
Yeah. So Suzanne Saliba is the founder here in WA. She's got an amazing story.
So can you tell us, we were hoping to get Susan on the call, but she wasn't available at this time. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works, how a Western Australian Perth-based person sets up a charity in Africa, or how that goes on, some of the work they're doing there, and then we can maybe talk a bit about the link between that and the book.
Yeah, for sure. But I reckon, and I'll do my best to tell someone else's story. Like I'll do my best to summarize it. And Susan, correct it if you see this. But I think she's been going for about 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she went over much with the same view in mind as me. So she was a Cottesloe lady, married to an architect, had a lovely house, great life. And basically went off to Africa and had this experience, came back, sold her house, divorced her husband, and then basically went back and bought a tiny little space in order to get some of these other people from the street into a place where 100% of the funds goes to the people who they're helping. Because she was a bit sort of like, what the hell is this volunteer method that they have over there? Because not all the money goes, where it's supposed to, and all those sorts of things. So she took Christopher with her. She met him there, as far as I'm aware, and they grew the amount of people that their children that they were helping just off the side of the street over a period of time, where she just kept selling all the things that she owns to fund it. And now, still living in Western Australia, she still lives here. She'd love to live in Africa, I know, but her children are here. Her own biological children are here, but she has 300 of the other children over there. And here is because this is where we can actually help. This is where we can raise money, make awareness of people can actually do something financially. And so Christopher, who was born in Kenya, in Nairobi, he heads it up there and stays there. And then she is the person on the ground here. And so basically she devoted her entire life and all the things she has and all of her time and energy. She's getting close towards 70-ish, top end of 68, but she looks like my sister. She's like super cool. I love her. And she's a gutsy go-getter, let me tell you. Jesus, you wouldn't want to sort of get on the wrong side of that. She is just amazing. I love her. And so her compassion and her ability to like completely dedicate, it's almost like once you go, you can't not know. And I feel the same. Like I'm dedicated to all of my book sales and all of my art goes to the orphanage. And then my brain and my work goes towards understanding how systems can do this and why it happens, and then trying to infiltrate at the system level, why governments can actually abandon entire sections of the country, but through corruption. But that's a whole other story probably. So nothing small goes on in my world, Mike. And so Susan is a massive inspiration for me. Christopher is one of those people. I think I've met two people in my life. One lives in Sydney and one is Christopher, who I think are probably one of the most ethereal, incredible guru type people, quiet, hopeful, wise people that I've ever met in my life. And between him and Susan and the rest of their team, they do their very best. Unfortunately, the schools had to close because of COVID, and that means 300 children are out on the streets again in the slum. And so any money that we raise now, the 60 kids who live in the orphanage, who are technically children of the orphanage, so they belong to Susan as a mother and Christopher as a father. And, it's just the way that the legal system works. And essentially the other kids have gone back to a life on the street. So Christopher spends most of his time with the team out in the slums trying to find them or trying to help them and give them food from the money that we send. Yeah.
So in terms of sales of the book directly contributing, you're essentially sending that directly on to Nakuru Hope, and the way that they work is 100% of those funds end up where they're intended for, rather than tied up in admin and salaries and things like that.
And even when I went, the money got transferred to me and I drew it out of my own bank account and spent it myself. So that's how they do it. And so I know for sure that 100% of the profits that I send goes 100% to the people I've met directly and more. And so it's an incredible model, and I don't think there is another model where 100% goes. And so, so it's an incredible thing. And I think, it helps us to build global compassion for people that are not seen, and to not rest on our laurels in the glory and the privilege of where we live. I actually had a bit of guilt for a long time about the fact that I've got a nice little apartment with things in it. And then I realized, hang on a minute, just enjoy it, because that's where everyone else is trying to get to. So don't dismiss it and don't utilize it. Use it for what you can and continue to help those who can't necessarily easily help themselves. Yeah, I think Susan is the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's delightful. So I love the way that you're doing this. So many calls to charitable purpose are basically just a tug at the heartstrings, send us money, and what you're doing is saying buy a copy of that, and I'll send the money.
Yeah.
I can't really plug this highly enough. I think Sleeping Giants is a beautiful book. I find it hard to imagine anybody that wouldn't find something quite rich for themselves in there. It's a delightful book to gift to people. When I bought this copy, I bought 4, and the people that I've given the other 3 to have all said, "Oh, how wonderful it is! It's a real delight." And they're quite diverse. They're a CEO of a significant not-for-profit here in Western Australia, a fairly high-pressured government minister's communication official, and an admin assistant, and all of that sort of diversity have said what a delightful book and how much it's meant to them. So it's actually an exchange of value, which I think is a really delightful way to approach things like this, and it speaks volumes about your generosity in terms of gifting what could be money into your pocket for the lifetime you've invested in birthing this book. So thank you for that generosity and for that offer. And if people wanted to buy copies, knowing that they'll get something out of it themselves anyway, and that's partly what's happening, where would they find it?
I've kept it on my website for now so that I can get as much money for it as possible, take out the middle person.
Yes.
So that's SuzanneWaldron.com.
Okay, great. When we put the recording out, we'll include that in the links.
I've got a little idea, and I know you might need to go. Tell me, but can I maybe read the invitation?
Yeah, please do.
And I've got a few minutes, so I'll just maybe finish off this, but I haven't, I'm not, anyway, I'll just do it. Okay, so it looks like this. So, and by the way, the artwork inside of the book, there's different arts for every page. And Natalia Fadica, who is a dear friend of mine, an artist in Fremantle, did all the art for the book. So it's unique in every page. But here's the invitation. We each have a sleeping giant within us, even those of us who consider ourselves fully awake. None of us are immune to life's darker sides, the distractions, the exhaustion, the dormancy of our greatness. We all hold within us the quiet places where dreams reside, deep needs emerge, and the greatest parts of us are formed. The intention for this collection of thoughts and observations is that of an invitation, an offer to consider a deeper calling to life. So often I found myself asking the question, what is the point of this all? In whirling storms of confusion, sometimes exciting, other times excruciating, there is always the question, what is the point? And I've imagined that you've asked this question too. Within us is a well. It's always there, always present. It holds us for insight and wisdom, gleaned from observation, stories, experiences, the magnitude of our lives. Big or small, the giant inside us may be ready to wake up, to be validated and heard, to serve and to be of use. No matter the spectrum or size of the giant, it exists, and so then the opportunity stands before us. This invitation doesn't assume anything about you, the valued reader. It doesn't seek to label or preach. It doesn't forego your history or experiences. It simply lays bare reflections which come from near and far. Ancient writings, philosophy, faith, research, science, and art. Imagine this is a perfect time to be called upon. The intention is gentle, but please know that this invitation does invite your response. It speaks to you and your giant. Take what you need, disregard the rest, or perhaps put rest aside for a future time when that internal well needs a reinvigorating top-up. My dream is that this book lends itself to those times of searching, when the longing of deep meaning is calling to you. Perhaps something here in these pages may provide comfort and resonance. And if your soul feels provoked towards momentum, may you take the steps that embellish life and all that you hope for it to be. Your giant awaits you, and the world awaits your giant.
It's a delightful invitation. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me read. I don't usually read from my own books, so that was fun.
Excellent. I imagine an interesting experience hearing yourself read your own words out loud.
And then sometimes I'm like, God, I wrote that. That's right. And there's a couple of things in there where I'm like, remember that, Suzanne. Remember that. You've forgotten this. So believe me, I read my own book sometimes and I go, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. I remember to do that.
It's a delightful thing. Suzanne, thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciate it. And again, thanks for your generosity. Thanks for the gift that Sleeping Giants is, and for the awareness that you're bringing to places where people are doing it very tough in comparison to ourselves, and shining some light on the kinds of things that we can do immediately and more systematically to try and remedy some of that. It's a delight, as always, to spend time with you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for allowing us to talk about, what compassion really looks like in reality. And thanks for giving the platform for this.
My pleasure.